In the year 897, Pope Stephen VI put the corpse of a former pope on trial. His target was Pope Formosus, who had passed away the year before and was already buried. Stephen had his corpse exhumed, dressed up in ceremonial robes, and seated upright on a throne in the Pope's official cathedral in Rome, all so he could stand trial for violating canon law. This event became known as the Cadaver Synod. The accusation was that Formosus became pope while still serving as the bishop of another region, and as pope he had appointed bishops and supported rival factions during a period of a sort of civil war in Italy. When Stephen became pope, he was backed by the opposite political side. By putting Formosus on trial, even though he was already gone, Stephen could delegitimize his predecessor's decisions and take power back from his enemies. The corpse, of course, didn't speak at the trial, but that didn't stop the process. A representative was appointed to answer on Formosus's behalf. The trial was treated as real. Witnesses were called, charges were read. And, shocker, Formosus was found guilty. Stephen declared that all of Formosus's actions as pope were invalid. That meant any clergy appointed by Formosus could now be removed. After the trial, the corpse was stripped of its robes, then had its index and middle fingers cut off to humiliate and devalue his legacy, and then was dumped into a common grave, then later dug up and thrown into the Tiber River. Even in the chaos of 9th century Rome, this shocked the Church. Within months, Stephen VI was arrested and imprisoned. He was later found strangled in his cell, and it's unclear whether this was self-inflicted or not. John XII became pope at about 18 years old and used the position for personal pleasure. His father, Alberic II of Spoleto, controlled Rome and had arranged for his teenage son, then named Octavianus, to be elected pope in 955. The chronicler Liutprand of Cremona, who served as an imperial ambassador, accused John XII of turning the palace into what he called a brothel. He allegedly brought lovers, male and female, into the palace, gambled with church funds, and toasted to the devil during feasts. He was also accused of simony, the selling of official church positions, as well as perjury and even ordaining a deacon in a stable. These charges were more than just rumors. They were listed in formal indictments presented at a synod, a special council of members of the church, to judge the pope's conduct. But John XII's real downfall came when he angered Otto I, King of Germany. John had crowned Otto as Holy Roman Emperor in 962, but soon after tried to undermine him by secretly negotiating with his enemies. When Otto found out, he marched on Rome. John fled the city. In his absence, Otto convened a synod of his own with bishops and produced a list of formal charges, which included the most vile of crimes and invoking pagan gods. The bishops declared John deposed and replaced him with Leo VIII. But that situation didn't last. Once Otto left Rome, John returned with armed supporters. He expelled Leo, retaliated against his enemies with brutal violence, and regained control. He passed unexpectedly in 964, reportedly during or shortly after an intimate meeting with a married woman. Some sources say he suffered a stroke. Others suggest her husband intervened. In 1045, Pope Benedict IX agreed to resign in exchange for a large cash payment from his own grandfather. He was the first elected pope in 1032, at around 20 years old. His father, Count Alberic of Tusculum, controlled much of Rome and used his political leverage to place his son on the papal throne. The Tusculan family had already produced 2 popes, and they treated the papacy as a hereditary title. This was the third in the line. Chroniclers described Benedict IX as engaging in acts unfit for the papacy, but most avoided details. Later sources, including reformist clergy, accused him of hosting intimate parties with multiple partners inside the Lateran palace, and also of exploiting his position for personal pleasure. While not all claims can be confirmed, multiple sources agree that Roman nobles demanded his removal because of repeated public scandals. Some described his papacy as a disgrace to the chair of Peter. Others said he abandoned the office simply out of boredom. Either way, he was forced out in 1044. A rival pope, Sylvester III, took his place, but Benedict returned a few months later with armed support and retook the throne. Then, the next year, he did something unprecedented. He offered to resign, in exchange for money. He approached his godfather, Archpriest Giovanni Gratian, and agreed to step down if Gratian paid him. Gratian accepted, and became Pope Gregory VI. But Benedict wasn't finished. He returned again in 1047, reclaiming the papacy for a third time after Gregory was removed for simony, the very act that brought him in. This time, the public backlash and church opposition were too strong. By 1048, Benedict IX was permanently removed. He never faced trial or renounced his claim. Benedict IX is the only man in history to serve as pope 3 separate times, and the only one confirmed to have sold the office for cash. The church later called his reigns disgraceful, but at the time, there was no formal mechanism to stop him. Pope Sergius III didn't win a papal election. He came to power backed by soldiers, with 2 of his rivals no longer living. In 897, Sergius had been a bishop aligned with Pope Formosus, but after Formosus passed on, a violent power struggle broke out. Sergius was exiled. His enemies installed a series of replacement popes, but none lasted long. The situation changed in 904, when Theophylact of Tusculum, a powerful Roman noble, led an armed force into the city. With Theophylact's support, Sergius seized the papacy. Within weeks, both his main rivals, Pope Leo V and Christopher, were gone. Sergius never explained what happened, but later sources accused him of having at least one of them eliminated to clear the way. Once in power, Sergius reversed everything his former enemies had done. He reaffirmed the Cadaver Synod we mentioned earlier, condemning Pope Formosus, which most of the church had already denounced. Sergius declared Formosus an illegitimate pope, invalidated his appointments, and reappointed loyal bishops. It's said Sergius began a relationship with Marozia, the teenage daughter of Theophylact. Some sources allege she gave birth to his son, who would later become Pope John XI. The Vatican has never officially confirmed or denied the paternity. This was the start of what later historians called the pornocracy, or the rule of harlots, a period in the 10th century when the papacy was effectively controlled by a small group of Roman noble families through private relationships and political violence. Sergius III lived until 911, still in power. He was never excommunicated or condemned. Rodrigo Borgia became Pope Alexander VI in 1492 by bribing most of the cardinals who voted in the conclave. He promised them land, titles, and money for their support. Cardinal Ascanio Sforza, for example, was immediately appointed vice-chancellor, one of the most powerful administrative roles in the church. That appointment was widely seen as repayment. But that's not what truly made Alexander controversial. He was also a big fan of nepotism. Once in charge, Alexander placed his children and relatives into high-ranking church roles. His son Cesare Borgia was made a cardinal at 18. Other family members who lacked qualifications were appointed bishops or granted control of wealthy dioceses. These positions gave the Borgia family access to church income, land, and political leverage. Next came the expansion. In 1500, Alexander created 12 new cardinals in one day. Why? Diplomatic records from Venice and Florence report that many paid tens of thousands of ducats to secure their titles. Simony, selling official church positions, was illegal, but under Alexander it became a fundraising strategy, and the money had a controversial purpose. It funded war. Cesare Borgia led military campaigns across central Italy, paid for by the papal treasury. Cities like Forli, Faenza, and Imola were conquered with Vatican gold, then handed over not to the church but to Cesare personally. Alexander also leveraged marriage law to secure political alliances. He personally annulled his daughter Lucrezia's marriage. The claim was that the marriage was never consummated, even though the couple had lived together for over a year. So why annul it? Well, because a better alliance had become available. Alexander's opponents were dealt with off the books. In 1502, several members of the Orsini family were arrested after being lured to a peace meeting. They were executed shortly after. That same year, Cardinal Giovanni Michele lost his life while in custody after opposing Borgia policy. No investigation followed. Alexander lost his life suddenly in 1503 after a private dinner with Cesare. There was no official cause of death, and while some believe something was slipped into his food or drink, there's no direct evidence, and the Vatican never investigated. Pope Julius III is mostly remembered for a scandal involving a teenage boy. In 1550, Julius appointed Incenzio del Monte as a cardinal. The boy was around 16 years old, illiterate, and had no theological or administrative background. He had been discovered by Julius's brother, working as a servant or stable boy. Julius later adopted him into the family. Within weeks of becoming pope, Julius gave Incenzio multiple titles: abbot, secretary, and even cardinal nephew. The last title came with real power, control over the church documents, access to foreign dignitaries, and enormous wealth. This shocked diplomats and church insiders. Letters from the time suggest many believed Julius's relationship with Incenzo was not just paternal. Even Catholic historians writing decades later struggled to explain the appointment. Official records never accused Julius of misconduct, but the rumors were widespread enough that the appointment remained controversial. Julius justified the choice by saying Incenzo was dear to him, and that it was customary for popes to elevate family members. But unlike other cases of nepotism, this one involved a young man with no qualifications and no noble birth. Meanwhile, Julius also allowed the Council of Trent, the Church's key platform to respond to Protestantism, to lapse. The cardinals who elected Pope Urban VI tried to undo it just months later, because they were afraid of what he might do to them. Urban was erratic, openly hostile, and accused of physically harming his own advisors. When he started threatening reforms that would cut off their privileges, many fled Rome and declared him an invalid pope. So they elected a second pope, Clement VII, who set up a rival Vatican in Avignon. That decision helped trigger the Great Western Schism, a crisis that split the Catholic Church for nearly 40 years. Here's how it happened. In 1378, Urban was elected pope under pressure. The College of Cardinals had gathered in Rome just days after the passing of Pope Gregory XI. An angry Roman crowd surrounded the building, demanding an Italian pope, not another foreigner. The cardinals were mostly French. Fearing for their safety, they chose Bartolomeo Priano, an Italian archbishop with a solid reputation. He took the name Urban VI. But once he became pope, his behavior changed drastically. Contemporary sources said Urban was harsh, paranoid, and verbally abusive, especially toward the French cardinals who had elected him. He accused them of corruption, insulted them publicly, and threatened reforms that would strip their privileges. Within weeks, many cardinals fled Rome. They claimed that the election had been made under duress and therefore wasn't valid. In September 1378, they elected a rival pope, Clement VII, who set up a papal court in Avignon, France. Now the church had two popes, both with real support. Urban held Rome, Clement held Avignon. Kings and bishops had to choose sides. Urban appointed new cardinals loyal to him, then accused several of them of plotting against him. In 1385, he had 5 of his own cardinals imprisoned and allegedly physically brutalized. Some were executed without trial. No formal investigation followed. Urban VI passed away in 1389, still claiming to be the rightful pope. In 1517, the Catholic Church made salvation for sale. Across German towns, church representatives offered documents called indulgences, papers that promised to reduce your punishment in the afterlife. The indulgences could cover your past sins, and you could even buy them on behalf of relatives who had already passed away. In theory, they required repentance, but in practice, they were sold like a sort of spiritual gift certificate. The most notorious figure was Johann Tetzel, who told crowds, "As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs." The man behind this campaign was Pope Leo X. He needed money. He had commissioned massive construction projects, including a new St. Peter's Basilica, and the Vatican was already deep in debt. The indulgence campaign was designed to refill the treasury. But the money didn't all go to the church. A large portion went to the Fugger banking family, who had lent funds to German archbishops trying to buy their positions. So the church sold indulgences, the bankers got paid, win-win. But the public was left out of the loop, exploited. In October 1517, a monk named Martin Luther responded by posting a public challenge to the sale of indulgences and the corruption behind them. He accused the church of exploiting fear to make money. Leo X dismissed it as a minor rebellion. When Luther refused to recant, Leo excommunicated him in 1521. But the protest didn't go away. Fueled by theological disputes, German resentment of papal authority, and the spread of printed texts, it escalated into a schism, what we now call the Protestant Reformation. By the time Leo X realized the scale of the crisis, it was too late. Pope Boniface VIII claimed that obeying the Pope was required for salvation, and he tried to enforce it on a king. He came to power in 1294 under unusual circumstances. His predecessor, Pope Celestine V, had resigned, one of the only popes in history to do so voluntarily. Boniface, then Cardinal Benedetto Caetani, was elected shortly after, and many contemporaries believed that he had pressured Celestine to step down. Once in power, Boniface asserted papal supremacy over secular rulers, especially King Philip IV of France. When Philip taxed the French clergy without papal permission, Boniface issued multiple formal proclamations demanding it stop. He said secular authorities had no right to tax the church, and went further declaring that submission to the Pope was necessary for every human soul. Philip responded by spreading rumors that Boniface denied the Trinity, practiced black magic, and kept demons in the Vatican. While none of these were substantiated, they fueled opposition across Europe. In 1303, Philip sent Italian allies to capture the Pope in his palace. Boniface was held for 3 days and physically assaulted. The event, known as the Outrage of Anagni, shocked the Catholic world. Though locals freed him, Boniface never recovered. His life was over within a month, possibly from trauma or stress. Pope Pius XII's silence during the Holocaust remains one of the most painful and unresolved questions in papal history. Pope Pius XII led the Catholic Church during World War II and for decades, he's been accused of saying too little, too late. He was elected just months before Germany invaded Poland. As war spread across Europe, the Vatican maintained official neutrality. But neutrality came at a cost. As the Nazi regime escalated its campaign against Jews, Pius XII never publicly condemned Hitler. He avoided specific references to Jews in wartime statements, only using general terms like persecuted peoples to address all victims. For instance, in 1942, Pius made a Christmas radio address denouncing the killing of hundreds of thousands of innocent people. But he did not name Germany, Nazism, or the Jewish people. Allied leaders saw it as vague. Nazi officials didn't view it as threatening. The Vatican said it was working behind the scenes, and there is evidence to support that. Under Pius's direction, some church institutions in Italy hid Jews from deportation. Diplomats aligned with the church intervened in Hungary and Slovakia, and Pius helped organize early efforts to deliver Red Cross assistance. But critics argue that moral leadership required public clarity. The Pope had global influence and spoke to over 400 million Catholics. So why not issue a direct public condemnation of genocide as it happened? Vatican defenders argue that speaking out would have made things worse. They cite cases where protest led to more severe crackdowns. Pius himself believed that diplomatic channels would do more good than public speeches. Newly released Vatican archives show he was briefed in real time on Nazi deportations, and chose to keep many of those reports internal. From the start of his papacy in 2013, Pope Francis's priorities set him apart from his predecessors. His focus on inclusion and social justice won praise from some and pushback from others inside and outside the church. Francis came in as somewhat of an outsider, the first Jesuit pope, the first from Latin America, and the first not born in Europe in over a millennium. Early on, he gained global attention for his tone. He refused the traditional papal apartment, washed the feet of prisoners, and famously said of gay Catholics, "Who am I to judge?" He called for a poor church for the poor, emphasized climate change and economic inequality, and shifted Vatican focus toward mercy and inclusion. Not everyone welcomed these moves. Conservative clergy and influential Catholics outside the clergy voiced disagreement. The fiercest backlash came after his 2016 document, Amoris Laetitia, where he appeared to open the door for divorced Catholics to receive communion. 4 high-ranking cardinals issued a formal challenge called Dubia, a list of yes or no questions asking whether he had changed church doctrine. Francis never answered directly. He's also drawn criticism for handling internal crises. His approach to the abuse scandal has been questioned, especially his defense of Chilean bishops later accused of covering up abuse. He removed some of them, but only after public outcry. In more recent years, Francis continued to reshape the Church's direction. He supported limited blessings for same-gender couples. He opened discussions on married priests and female roles in ministry. To some, this is long overdue reform. To others, it's a step in the wrong direction, and also could lead to fragmentation, where bishops in different parts of the world begin taking conflicting positions on doctrine and raising questions about whether the Church could still speak with one voice. Pope Francis passed away on April 21, 2025, at the age of 88, one day after giving his final Easter blessing. Thanks for watching the video and making it to the end. For more Catholic controversy, check out the video on your screen now for the most controversial saints. And if you like the video, please give a like and make it official. It really helps the channel. And we'd love to hear from you. What do you think of these controversial popes? Are the controversies justified? Or might they be blown out of proportion? Let us know in the comments. Thanks again. See you next time.